They say betrayal begins with silence. Not the screaming kind, but the quiet moments. A dinner without conversation. A bed shared with backs turned. This is the story of a man who gave everything, and one morning chose peace over pain. A husband, a wife, a home built on music and memory. And then one unopened letter, one final fugue. If you've ever loved, deeply lost quietly, or walked away without slamming the door, this story is for you. That night, even the moon seemed ashamed to shine. It hid behind thin clouds, casting no light on the chipped porch railings or the wooden steps groaning under time's weight. The air wasn't hot, it was heavy, thick with silence. Even the cicadas had gone still, as if they too were waiting. Inside the house smelled faintly of lilac air freshener, the kind Sarah sprays before her night shifts. It mixed poorly with the emptiness. No footsteps on the stairs, no soft humming in the kitchen. Only the ceiling fan slicing through the dark like a slow metronome. I sat facing the old Steinway, silent for years. My right hand, ruined in the accident, lay motionless on my knee. The bourbon in my glass had gone warm, but I drank it anyway. Bitterness matched the night. My name is Thomas Delaney. I used to play music. I used to believe in vows. Now I listen for what's not said, like the cologne on the bedsheets last week, or the wedding photo that fell behind the bookshelf left there untouched. You don't rescue something that's already chosen to fall. Lately, Sarah comes home late. Her excuses come fast. Emergency shift, she said, yet her scrubs were unwrinkled, her perfume unfamiliar. Tonight she's gone again. And I'm no longer waiting. I used to think betrayal came with shouting slam doors. But the real kind is quiet. A lipstick cap clicking shut at midnight. A call that ends the second you walk in. A name no longer spoken when they think you're asleep. I reached for my notebook, black leather bound. I'd been writing everything down. Not to remember, but to prove I wasn't crazy. Something's coming. I can feel it. And this time, I'll be ready. I began to notice the small things, details that would seem harmless to someone still in love, but to a man living among the cracks of broken trust, they whispered like warnings. One evening, when I wrapped my arms around Sarah from behind, as she stood by the sink, I caught a scent I didn't recognize. It wasn't hers. Not the sweet, gentle perfume she'd worn for years, but something sharper, headier, like whiskey, mixed with warning. It clung to her collar faintly, as if someone unfamiliar had leaned in too close. She told me it came from an unconscious male patient she'd had to carry during a long ER shift. He collapsed, she said, eyes never leaving her phone screen. I nodded, said nothing more. Then I began to notice the smaller things. Her work schedule became unnaturally full. The once rare night shifts started piling up Mondays, Wednesdays, even weekends. She'd say she'd be home by 7, but wouldn't show up until nearly noon. She didn't look tired, just different. One afternoon, under the blazing heat of a 36-degree day, I stepped into our bedroom and found the mirror fogged up. The air conditioner was on full blast. No one had taken a shower. I wiped away the condensation with my palm and stared at my reflection. I no longer saw a husband. I saw a character slowly being written out of a story he thought was his. Then came the button. A small ivory one at the bottom of the laundry basket. It didn't match anything in either of our wardrobes. I held it in my palm. It felt cold, colder than unread messages. From that day on, I began to write. I took notes quietly. No confrontations, no shouting, no accusations, just writing. Wednesday, 8:40 p.m. She left the house, white blouse, musky perfume, unfamiliar. Thursday, 11:17 a.m. Returned late. Cafe receipt for 2 in her pocket. Saturday, 6:02 p.m. Phone call from an unnamed number. Stepped out to talk for 14 minutes. I wasn't searching for evidence to condemn her. I was searching for clarity proof that I wasn't crazy for feeling what I felt. One night, I tried something simple. I sat downstairs holding the landline. Sarah was upstairs in the study she'd recently started locking. I dialed her mobile, an old habit we used to find romantic. Her phone didn't ring, but I heard a ringtone upstairs. Not from our bedroom, from the study. Then I heard her laugh. Not the polite chuckle she gave to coworkers, but a soft, real laugh, the kind someone lets out when they're being teased by someone they care about. A woman in love sharing a moment in a world I no longer belonged to. I hung up. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't call out her name. I just sat there, my black leather notebook open to a fresh page. I wrote Monday, 10:33 p.m., called from downstairs. Ringtone came from upstairs. Laughter followed. She didn't answer. I started paying closer attention to her phone. She was careful, but sometimes left it charging on the kitchen counter or by the sink. I never opened it. I didn't want to become the kind of man who searched through texts. I only glanced at her recent call log. One number kept showing up, always around 10 p.m. or later. No name, no label, just a pattern. I copied the number down, watched for it. Each time it rang, it felt like a shadow creeping across my side of the bed. Another evening, Sarah told me she was staying overnight at the hospital. I didn't object. I slipped a GPS tracker, one I'd ordered a month ago, into her purse. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, only that I needed to know. The blinking dot left our house at 8:15 p.m. I tracked it from my phone. It didn't go to the hospital. It stopped at a luxury apartment complex on the city's east side, 7th floor. I drove there. Parked across the street. The lights were on. Through the curtains, I could make out two figures standing in the kitchen. They moved to the balcony, clinked glasses, laughed. Then the man leaned down and kissed Sarah on the forehead. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel hurt. What I felt was a vast emptiness. Not a hole, but an entire room cleared out, abandoned. I returned home at 2 a.m. Sarah wasn't back yet, and that was it. The doubt was gone. I had the truth. No blood, no screams, just a ringtone from upstairs and laughter that didn't belong to me. I said nothing. The last real conversation we ever had was on a Saturday afternoon, when the last golden light of day crept through the shutters and cast long shadows across the floor. Sarah was slicing apples in the kitchen, and I sat at the table absent-mindedly turning a coffee spoon in my hand like a man searching for the right way to speak. I asked her something that at the time seemed harmless. Do you think you're living a happy life? She didn't look up. What is happiness really? I don't think I have time to define it anymore. I remember laughing, a smile so faint that I couldn't even hear its sound. She placed the apple slices on a plate and walked past me as if the question had never existed. From that moment on, I knew there was an unnamed void between us that no one wanted to fill. I stopped speaking long ago, not because I had nothing left to say, but because words became redundant in the presence of truth. There are moments in a person's life when silence becomes the final verdict. And that evening in the house that once was our home, I carried out the sentence. I sat motionless at the bottom of the stairs where the dark wrapped around me like a cold and distant mother. Upstairs, Sarah had just seen him out the door. I heard it close. I heard her heels on the wooden floor. A soft sigh, barely audible, as if trying to dissolve into the night. Every sound was too clear when your heart has already gone quiet. I didn't need to see any more. I had already seen enough. The scene from the hidden camera replayed endlessly in my mind, like a torn reel stuck on the same frame. She stepped in close, wrapped her arms around his neck, her lips brushing his, as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. No hesitation, no second glance. Then came the embrace, long, full, meaningful, but not meant for me. She walked him to the door. He kissed her forehead. She smiled, then turned and climbed the stairs. As the yellow light broke across each step, she passed me by. I stayed there. She didn't look, or perhaps she looked and chose not to stop. It made no difference. After the door closed, I stood up, slowly, without a sound. I walked toward the loft room where I kept everything where no one would think of hiding anything from me. I turned on the computer. That pale blue light spilled over my hands like moonlight on a gravestone. I opened the folder labeled Camera Hidden Neo 3, the one planted in the living room right beneath the southern landscape painting Sarah had picked out when we moved in. I clicked on the video from that night. No need to rewind. I knew exactly what I was looking for. Sarah entered the frame. The man followed. She helped him take off his coat. They laughed, clinked glasses. He leaned in, whispered something. Sarah laughed the laugh I once believed was mine alone. They sat on the sofa. Hands brushed. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. I stopped the video there. Clicked the print icon. The printer hummed. One by one, the images rolled out. The kiss, the embrace, the glance. Sarah climbing the stairs. Him standing in the doorway. And me, the shadow hunched at the foot of the staircase, caught in one frame at the corner of the screen, just clear enough to know I was there, just clear enough for her to know I had seen. I gathered the photos, arranged them chronologically like a case file for an affair no one would deny. I opened the drawer and took out the old music box that, made of walnut corner, is scratched. On its lid, the inscription she had once jokingly engraved, "For your collection of lies." Sarah used to say it was a joke, a way of teasing my little secrets. I laughed then. Now I don't find it funny anymore. I opened the box, placed the photos inside. No note, no message. Truth does not need an introduction. It carries its own weight. I closed the lid. No lock, but no one would want to open it anyway. I poured myself a glass of bourbon. I hadn't drunk in a long time. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I had been waiting for the right reason. Tonight I had one. I turned on the music. Not something new. It was a recording of my final performance before the accident that took away the precision of my right hand. The recording began with a wave of applause, then silence, then piano clear, exact, full of feeling. I had once been that man, the man who played with his whole heart, who lived through music, who had been loved. I sat down in the armchair facing the sofa, as though sitting in a seat reserved for the leftover. My back pressed against the worn cushion, but the comfort it once held was gone. Every fiber, every indent recalled a memory, Sarah and I sharing dinners here, watching films on winter nights, even sharing silence that felt full, not empty. Now all I felt was absence. I looked at the sofa like a man staring at a closed chapter where her laughter once lived, where her head once rested on my shoulder. Each detail that once made this room ours had now become an exhibit of betrayal. But I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. Something inside me simply fractured quietly, neatly, like a drop of water falling in a deserted house. I felt myself torn, furious and tender. Furious at the betrayal, at being cast aside. Tender because I had once loved her with everything gentle inside me, and now there was only silence in return. For a fleeting second, I wanted to stand up, go upstairs, knock on her door, and ask why. But that second passed, and I stayed still like a monument to something that no longer deserved remembrance. The sofa still bore the impressions of two people who had once sat too close, the hollows where their bodies had leaned into each other, where I once set my coffee each morning, where Sarah once rested and read in the sunlight. Now only the shapes remained. The people were gone. I stared at that empty seat as if it contained the rest of my life, silent, unresolved. I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned down my throat. But I didn't cough. That searing sensation felt more alive than the numbness I'd grown used to. Outside, the curtain trembled in the breeze. Streetlight reflections shimmered faintly on the wooden floor. The house was the same, but I was no longer me. When the music ended, I set the glass down. Quietly, no sound. I didn't open the music box. I didn't need to hear its tune. I'd heard enough. I'd seen enough. A sentence echoed in my mind, not sure whose voice it was, not sure when I'd first heard it, but I knew it was true. She took my heart with her. But I still have my memory, and memory does not forgive. No one cried that night. There was only the ticking of the clock, the whisper of wind through the window crack, the bourbon dissolving down my throat like acid, and me, a man at the very end of a dead marriage, staring into the dark, no yelling, no sobbing, just silence. The silence of a verdict already passed. No judge, no jury, only an empty chair and a music box that closed. The next morning I woke with a strange sensation. No anger, no confusion, just a quiet emptiness that frightened me with its stillness. The sun was already up. Light poured through the shutters, creeping into the room like an unwelcome messenger, reminding me that the world had continued, even though something inside me had quietly died the night before. I didn't rush to get up. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, my hands resting on my knees, eyes fixed on nothing. There were no questions left, no scripts to follow. Everything that needed knowing, I had known. Everything that needed proving, I had proved. Last night was the closing argument, even if no one spoke a word. When I stepped out of the bedroom, I saw Sarah already downstairs in the kitchen. She was wearing her pale gray silk robe, the kind she always wore on slow mornings. On the dining table was the music box, its lid open. Inside lay the printed photographs stacked neatly like a cruel gift. I didn't know when she'd found them, but the moment I entered the kitchen, the look she gave me was as if she'd seen a ghost. She didn't speak right away. She stood frozen, her hands trembling, her face drained of color. Then suddenly she cried out, "Thomas, I can explain. It's not what you think." She stepped toward me, voice breaking, no longer the confident woman she once was. This was the voice of someone reaching for what they'd already dropped. "I was wrong. I know that. But I didn't mean to leave you. I just got lost. I was afraid that you didn't need me anymore." I looked at her. Not with rage, not with hatred, just the look of someone who had walked too far to turn back and no longer had the strength to ask for directions. I sat at the dining table, quietly, like I was preparing for breakfast, but instead of picking up a fork, I took out a plain white napkin from my pocket, the kind meant for crumbs or smudged lipstick. I picked up a pen, wrote one sentence, my handwriting calm, as if I were writing down the grocery list. I was never angry. Just done. I slid the napkin across the table toward her, placing it gently between us, like a final border. Sarah read it. Her hands clenched, her lips trembled. "I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to me, but if you want me to stop, I will. I'll stay." "We can," her voice cracked. I said nothing. The sentence I had written echoed through the silence like a bell in a church that no longer held sermons. I didn't speak, not because I lacked words, but because I had no desire to use them. She wept. For the first time in a long while, I saw her cry, but her tears could no longer reach me. They slid past me like rain on a cold rooftop. She stood there for a long moment, shoulders drooping, hands at her sides, like a child left behind after school. Then, without another word, she left the kitchen. I heard the stairs, the drawers, the faint thump of a suitcase. Then the door opened. Then it closed. Not loudly, not softly, just the sound of something ending. I didn't walk her out, didn't say goodbye, didn't ask where she was going. I knew it no longer mattered. She no longer belonged here. And I no longer needed someone to stay just because they felt guilty. I sat there for a long while after she left. Didn't cry, didn't sigh. I just sat in the kitchen so quiet I could hear the sound of my coffee cup resting on the wooden table. Where she once stood now, there was only sunlight. Where she once said, "I love you," there was now only the sentence I had scribbled on a napkin, the final line of a chapter I would never reread. When I stood, the chair let out a soft creak, like a last breath released into an empty room. I picked up the napkin, folded it in quarters, slipped it into my jacket pocket. Not to keep, but to remind myself some endings don't need drama, just someone who finally stops holding on. Sarah left like a stranger in a house that once was a home, and I remained in the place where we used to be, and a sentence that needed no reply. This morning, there was only me. The house hadn't changed. The paint still peeled slightly around the window frames. The wooden floor still creaked beneath my heels, and the old clock in the hallway was still 3 minutes slow. But in all that remained unchanged for the first time, I felt peace. No more silences shaped like arguments that never began. No more dinners filled with the clinking of forks and lowered eyes. No more nights lying back to back, close in distance, cold in spirit. I made coffee, washed the cup, dried the sink. Each small act was a quiet reclaiming of the space that had long been halved without either of us admitting it. I opened a drawer and took out the last piece of music I had ever written. A fugue composed in longhand. It had never been performed, never been heard. I wrote it on a sleepless night when love had already collapsed, but I still clung to the pen like a doctor pressing on the chest of a heart that had stopped, its title Fugue for a Faithless Wife. I placed it gently on the table beside an old letter I had never sent. The first line read, "Come back." I picked up a pen, drew a line through it, and wrote in clean, firm strokes, "Don't." I stepped out onto the porch, carrying nothing, just the morning sun, an unsent letter, and a piece of music never played. Freedom, I realized, isn't always leaving. Sometimes it's staying when you no longer wait for anyone to return,